We're going to be looking at chart interpretation, which means looking at planets, houses, signs, aspects between planets, and determining how does that chart mirror who the person is that the chart belongs to. Off to the side here is a chart that belongs to a woman named Laura. Whenever I start a chart, I begin with the planet Mars, the ruler of the first house, and you can see it in the sixth house, conjunct the sun in the sign of Leo. This is a classic setup for someone who has an interest in health. Also, we want to look at the aspects to Mars. Mars is getting hit by Ceres, is being squared, and also it's getting a sextile from Uranus. The square from Ceres is telling us someone who is overly critical of others. They're very good at analyzing, they're very good at seeing what the problem is, but it's hard for them not to criticize other people. The sextile to Uranus in the eighth house, this is telling us exactly that this person really has a lot of knowledge, wonderful insight into problem solving. And then last, we want to look at the ascendant. You can see it there at 10 degrees of Aquarius. The one aspect I can really see showing up strong is the moon squaring the ascendant. This has a tendency to show someone who overeats or has a weight problem. So moving on, we're going to look at the second house and Venus. Venus is in the seventh house in Virgo. It's making a really good aspect to the moon. This almost always shows someone who has really good skills in some area, skills that other people don't have, and it usually allows them to make a pretty good income. And then there's a couple other aspects, the 165-degree aspect from Vader in the first house, as well as the Pluto aspect to the second house cusp. This is clearly showing someone who is underappreciated. They haven't received the pay at certain times of their life that they really deserved. And then to go with that, or to complement that, is a Campania in the sixth house trining that second house cusp. And this is showing that at other periods of her life, Laura will be compensated fairly. Next, we want to look at Mercury. Mercury rules schooling, K through 12, also sibling. In Laura's chart, Mercury is squaring Saturn, and it's making a semi-square to Uranus. These are both very difficult, tough aspects to have. Laura probably didn't do very good in school. She may have had a learning disability, or she just really didn't like school. On top of that, if you look at the third house cusp at 0 degrees of Taurus, both the Sun and Mars are squaring that cusp. This isn't horrible, but it shows someone who really was frustrated with school and possibly sibling. So moving on to the fourth house, this house is ruled by the moon. The moon is in the third house in Laura's chart. The moon is trining Venus, and this is always an indication that you have a really good relationship with your parents. Also, Jupiter is making some hard aspects in this case, the 165 aspect to the moon, as well as the inconjunct to the fourth house cusp. This is always an indication that Laura inherited a lot of her political or religious beliefs from her parents. To contradict what I just said, because the moon's in the third house, we got to look at Mercury. Mercury, again, is in the seventh house. It's making a 15-degree aspect to Mars, and it's also making a 45-degree aspect to Uranus. This is both arguing with parents or a parent, and Uranus is a parent who's very different from you, or possibly a parent that got removed early on for whatever reason, divorce or something else. Next, we want to move on to the fifth house. This is all about a person's social life and also children. The first thing we want to look at is the sun, which rules this house. We know it's in the sixth house. It's in Leo. We've talked about how it squares Ceres. Because it's in the sixth house and because it's squaring Ceres, it's showing someone who's way too critical of their children. It also would show someone who's way too analytical in social situations. And with Gemini on the cusp, also we want to look at Mercury. As we said before, Mercury is squaring Saturn, making a 45-degree aspect to Uranus. These are kind of tough. It's a lot of responsibility in terms of raising kids. Also, on the plus side, Compania is making some good aspects, 30-degree aspect to the fifth house cusp in this case, which shows harmony with children, very close relationship to your kids. And lastly, we want to look at Neptune in the 10th house. It's making a trine to the sun. This is very good because it's showing an aspect of spirituality in terms of your relationship with your kids. Very positive. They probably picked up your spirituality, and or there's a lot of talk in that area. So moving on, we're going to talk about the 6th house. This house represents the analytical mind. For that reason, it's where we look for the workplace. It's employees, employers, co-workers, all that stuff that goes on inside the workplace. It's ruled by the planet Ceres. Ceres is in your 3rd house. We've already talked about how it squares the sun and Mars. This is tough, as we've already said, but there is some positive aspects here. Venus is making a sextile to that 6th house cusp at 13 degrees of Cancer. And then also because Ceres is in the sign of Taurus, we want to look at Venus. And Venus is there in the 7th house, and it's trining the moon. These are two very good aspects. So no matter how much I've talked about how critical you are of other people, in the workplace, you seem to have a really good relationship with people. Next, we're going to move on to the 7th house, which is partnership and marriage. This house is ruled by Compania, in my opinion. Compania is there in the 6th house, as you can see. A few things here about this. Compania is making a 15-degree aspect to Mars. Also, because Compania is in the 6th house, we want to look at Ceres in the 3rd house. We've already talked about the square from Mars and the Sun. Both of these are showing anger and arguing in marriage. Also, because Compania is in the sign of Cancer, we want to look at the moon. The moon is trining Venus, and the moon-Venus trine, and especially because Venus is in the 7th house, the house of marriage, this usually shows long-term happy marriages. So there's probably some of each. There's probably a happy marriage, but there's a lot of arguing as well. Moving on to the 8th house. The 8th house is personal power. It's also investing, retirement, that kind of thing. We want to look at the planet Vader. You see it in the 1st house in Pisces. Vader is making one of those 165 aspects to Venus. This is showing you've done very well in terms of your retirement. Also, because it's in the 1st house, we want to look at Mars. And Mars is making a square to Ceres in the 3rd house. It shows you're meticulous about your savings and what you've got set aside. And then also, Vader is in Pisces, so we want to look at the planet Neptune. And Neptune is making a trine to your sun. And this is wonderful. This is clearly showing that you've done really well with your investing. You've made really good decisions. Moving on to the 9th house. The 9th house is all about higher learning and higher interests. In your chart, you have Jupiter, the ruler of the 9th house, on the 9th house cusp. And then along with that, Vader in the 1st house is trining Jupiter and that 9th house cusp. This is showing someone who's ultra something. You're either really religious, or you work at a university, or there's something about your higher interests which keep you very preoccupied. I don't know what that is, obviously, but this is a very intense aspect. On top of that, we've talked about the Sun-Mars conjunction. This conjunction is squaring that 9th house cusp, and the Sun is actually squaring Jupiter as well. This is showing someone who's really putting a lot of energy into something, and the Leo would show that you're part of some group. So this isn't something you're doing independently. So moving on to the 10th house. The 10th house is career and where you're going to find responsibility in life. Because you have Saturn, the ruler of the 10th house, in the 3rd house, we're going to want to look at aspects to Saturn. Saturn is making a sextile to Compania in the 6th house. This is showing harmony and you enjoy whatever it is you do for a living. But also the Saturn is trining Pluto and that 8th house cusp. And this is showing someone who's very motivated in their career or whatever it is. I'm saying this because you have Saturn in Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus. We've talked about that Venus moon aspect. This is sort of the classic setup for a full-time mom. Also, we want to talk about how Saturn is in the third house. It's ruled by Mercury. Saturn is squaring Mercury. In most cases, this is a tough aspect, but when it comes to career, it's showing someone who really does want to take on responsibility. And then lastly, Jupiter up there in the eighth house is making that 30-degree aspect to both Neptune and the midheaven. And Neptune up there is telling us something about spirituality. I'm not sure what that means, but the Jupiter aspect is showing success in career involving something that's spiritual. Moving on to the 11th house, this is the house of friendship and group association. We want to look at the planet Uranus, the ruler of the 11th house. Uranus is in the 8th house, and it's making an aspect to a negative aspect to Mercury. And this is showing someone who has a criteria, meaning people kind of have to measure up if they're going to be friends with you. You don't just let anyone into your circle. Also, because Uranus is in the 8th house, we want to look at Vader. It's in the 1st house in Pisces. We've talked about how that planet trines Jupiter, and Jupiter's up there in that 9th house. 9th house cusp. This is really strong, and it's showing that you have probably a really big social life, or the group association is very strong in your life. A lot of time spent with that. And last, we want to talk about the 12th house. This is the house of spirituality and that time that you spend when you're by yourself. The planet we want to look at is Neptune. It rules the 12th house. You can see it up there on the 10th house cusp. One of the things about your chart is you've got Vader in the 1st house squaring Neptune. And this is showing how important it is for you to get that alone time and to be away from everyone else. Also, you want to look at Jupiter up there in the 8th house, close to the 9th house cusp. It's making a 30-degree aspect to Neptune. This is showing lots of benefit and sort of good luck in terms of the time that you get to spend alone. Also, the moon down in the 3rd house is making that 165 aspect to Neptune. This is showing that you really do get time to yourself and you really enjoy that.